So I've been looking into this some more, the difference between real selective mutism and the difficulty to be verbal when you feel in sensory overload. That's not quite the same. So praise is a form of pressure. It means now you can do it again and better. Demand avoidance kicking in my case for sure. I always felt stressed when somebody praised me, and then I underperformed, so I wouldn't get any praise anymore. And this would feel quite liberating. But for me, selective mutism was a real issue when I went to school, and I still have that when being asked a question in front of people, a question that I wasn't prepared for, then I will just remain silent, completely unable to think of an answer. So, selective mutism, that name is not helpful. It should be called situational mutism. People think you have a choice in this when you have not. You don't choose not to speak. You just can't sometimes. Therefore, it is judgmental to say you won't speak. It is not a deliberate act. It is very consistent. There is always this utterly predictable pattern of the situation where the individual manages to speak and other situations where they don't. The fact that it is so specific makes it very different from mood disorders. It's all down to the situation, not specific people. Well, in my case, I would say it is specific people. With some people, I really feel at ease, I relax, and then I'm really fluent. And with other people, I freeze. So for me, it's both situational as well as with specific people. Some people just stress me out, and then I have difficulty being really fluent, explaining myself. But it has become better. As a child, may speak to a parent, but as soon as another person listens, they can't speak anymore in the presence of that listener. Exactly. It's that situation. And thus you learn to avoid certain situations, so you will not be expected to speak. You become invisible, start wearing hoodies. You prefer reading books, you avoid interacting with classmates. Yeah, I used to carry around a book all the time, so I could read during the breaks when it was so noisy. I just dived into the book and I wouldn't hear all the noise around me, and I wouldn't have to interact because I didn't know what to say anyway. So a book was a great tool to have to feel bit more safe in a noisy environment. For me, it was always about too many people. Then I could not get the words out in front of class, for example. Teachers would think I did not know when I just could not speak in front of class. One English teacher in particular, she was so surprised how good my English actually was. When I talked to her in private, in her office, I felt safe there. In front of class, however, I could not give an answer. I kept silent. I was too afraid to speak. And that was classic selective mutism in that case. Because there was no chance I could get the word out. My heart would beat in my chest and I would tremble. I would read from a text. That was possible, but not really answer a question without script. I still have this, not answering a question in front of a group. Words just get stuck in my throat. With my dad at home, I would speak more or less normally unless he asked a question, then I would go silent. But in public, I would go rather silent, and it wasn't a choice. I wrote about this a while ago, and now I'm diving back into it because I came across some new information which I will share later. So, the fear-related selective mutism, as I have experienced it as a kid. I had selective mutism. I have grown out of it, but it can still happen in certain situations. As a kid, I had this at school, mostly with strangers, neighbors, friends, of parents, basically all people except my parents. I had a few friends and one or two I would talk, but then again I would not talk. I could also absolutely not speak in front of class, as I said. My heart would beat in my chest like crazy, my throat constricted, I hardly could breathe. I felt fear to hear my voice or fear to make a mistake. Absolutely terrifying. So, the selective mutism, for me, it was always about too many people. I could not get the words out. In front of class in particular. In 5th grade, we were supposed to give a lecture of 30 minutes in front of class. I knew my topic about horse grooming. At home, I could say it all. But in front of class, I almost fell apart. My legs trembled, even my lips trembled. I could hardly get the words out. My souffleuse had to read almost everything for me so I could repeat it after her. It was a disaster, very humiliating, and from that day on I refused to participate in any form of public speaking or play. I could not do it. I was terrified of it. I was scared to death of public performances. What absolutely terrifies me still, and where my selective mutism still comes out very strongly, that's when I am supposed to sing in public. I used to be in a choir and I had really a hard time to sing loudly. I was afraid it was not in tune, and I also didn't like my singing voice, even though people told me I sing beautifully. I was so stressed out, and then at the end I just moved my mouth and whispered. I couldn't sing anymore. I was so terrified. There was no voice coming out. I can whistle, that's possible, but in front of a person singing, no way. So, selective mutism is a social anxiety disorder that renders a person unable to speak in certain situations. Many autistic people experience selective mutism. It is not shyness or refusal. Please be understanding. However, there is another type of inability to speak, and that's not selective mutism. And this is the one that I experience now more than selective mutism. When I feel overwhelmed by a social situation, for example a workshop or just being with several people for several hours non-stop, at some point I basically die off. I just don't feel like talking anymore. I feel way too exhausted. And then talking is just not possible. The effort takes too much energy. You are already at your limit. I can feel also sad because I don't understand what this is all about and would prefer to be with my books alone. I feel like an alien and stop to move and talk and just sit there. When I feel totally overstimulated and it feels as if I had a potato in my mouth when I speak, it's so hard to get the words out. That's not anxiety driven, but comes from sensory overload. It is hard to think. It is also hard to understand the meaning of other people's words. Like a motor running too hot and I'm really running on fumes, no storage room left. Everything slows down. And when this happens, usually not even coffee can help and all I need is rest. It is usually also accompanied by back pain and general exhaustion. Next day I usually have a migraine, system overload. By now I have trained myself to talk in front of a group to be able to introduce myself, which I still hate. I usually just say my name and then I go silent. I really hate that custom of introducing yourself when you sit in a circle of a group. Oh, this is so stupid. I prefer to just get used to all the other people in the room, listen, and then slowly relax, and then I feel comfortable saying something. But introducing yourself right from the start, just when you arrived and maybe you are a bit stressed from the travel, and then you have to introduce yourself, that's torture. Yeah, so there is an update. I had a real fear to speak on camera. I could not do any videos me speaking like this as I do now. I just played music, or I would just show the text, but I would not speak. And thanks to Thomas Clark, who has inspired me to talk more on my videos, I now really have trained myself to do that. So I'm a little bit more fluent, but I still have to edit out some long pauses in between. And that's why I often use a script like this, so I can read from it and then there are no long pauses in between. And it's more fluent and not that slow. So thanks to Tom, it was a good speech therapy actually. However, when we have those carnivore Zoom meetings where several people randomly pop in and out, and there is always movement on the screen, so wherever there is noise from one person, this person will pop up on the screen. So it's so irritating and so distracting. All those sounds, I feel so overwhelmed by that. And that's why I really prefer one-on-one, just one person. Or two is okay too, but a group of people in a Zoom meeting, that's so exhausting, so draining, just from all that movement on the screen. It's too wild. Too many noises at once. And then I fall silent again. Because it's too much, it's overwhelming, and then I don't talk much at all. And when I'm asked an unexpected random question, when I didn't have time to think about the answer, then I don't answer. I just sit there, mute, not answering, not possible to say anything. I feel overwhelmed by the question, the complexity. So many answers pop up in my head, and then all those overwhelming thoughts in my head, and then there is nothing of that thought process coming out. It's overwhelming, so I need time to think about a question, and then I can clearly answer it after that. And on screen I feel I am in a heightened stress level, especially during a meeting. So that's when it happens that I just don't say anything. And questions to me are not something I feel comfortable with. I prefer to prepare on a topic in advance and then just talk about the topic, but random questions, that's kind of difficult. I also can't stand being watched by many people. This feels almost physically painful and is so overwhelming, and that will shut me off. I will therefore avoid standing in the middle of attention at any cost, and I will not do any form of public speaking at all. I will just not, because then I will get the reaction of trembling legs and trembling hands. My lips will be trembling, my heart will be beating fast. That will be a complete stress reaction, and then it's very difficult to talk when you are trembling like that. And the anxiety is building up, so there will not much be coming from me in such a state. Augmentative and alternative communication for speaking autistic adults. Augmentative and alternative communication addresses the needs of people with speech and communication disabilities using a variety of techniques and tools. These tools include communication boards, speech-generating devices, manual signs, and other electronic and non-electronic supports. AAC can both support existing speech and serve as an alternative to speech. At its most inclusive, AAC covers all the way people communicate without or in addition to verbal speech, including methods used by people with typical speech. For some people and in some situations, simply writing or typing is sufficient, without needing an application that is specifically designed for AAC. Typed words, loud voices described itself as an anthology by people who type to communicate without requiring that the typing occurs in a context that would be considered AAC for those without speech disabilities. For example, autistic communities have grown from email lists where communication is already text-based. Online chat rooms and unlimited texting plans have similarly improved social communication and allowed friendships to grow. Information and communication technologies have provided important options for a variety of AAC users. For in-person interactions, writing or typing in advance and then showing the results to conversational partners is one option. Writing in the moment is another. Somebody shared an article about intermittent speech in autistic adults, and that rang a bell. Really, I can so relate to this. This is just what I described when feeling overwhelmed. There do not seem to be formal studies of intermittent speech in autistic adults that consider intermittent speech as potentially distinct from selective mutism, but it is really distinct. In selective mutism, you feel a fear of speaking. You are afraid to hear your own words. Your throat is constricted. However, intermittent speech, it seems to be a bit different. There are some outward similarities between the intermittent speech described by many autistic people and selective mutism speech for autistic adults. Autistic people have a mix of context-related strengths and weaknesses in language, communication, and social interaction. Some autistic people do not speak at all or do not use speech to communicate. Autistic people who use speech may experience intermittent, unreliable, and/or insufficient speech. In insufficient speech, a person's oral speech agrees with their knowledge and beliefs, but does not fully meet their communication needs. That is, the person can speak orally and accurately, but not completely. They cannot always communicate everything one wishes to, using oral speech alone. In all three cases, a person could be considered to have functional speech, but requires additional communication supports or strategies to access their full communication rights. So, I really prefer to communicate by writing. This is my most preferred communication style, and I am much more fluent when I write. When I talk, it takes more time and I feel it's not so eloquent or coherent. So, selective mutism is a consistent failure to speak in certain social situations where there is a natural expectation of speaking, and intermittent speech does not always follow this pattern. Illness and overall stress can cause this temporary inability to speak, as can sensory overload and meltdowns. Absolutely. The sensory overload and meltdowns, as well as feeling extremely stressed, then my speech is really very incoherent. Co-occurring conditions such as migraines, which I have, and epilepsy may also cause an autistic person to be unable to speak. Yeah, you just feel really tired and then you don't have the energy. And the pain is also interfering with your clear thinking. Very often when you have a migraine, you also feel brain fog. So then automatically you prefer to remain silent because of the effort it takes to think clearly and bring forward some words. Then there is that interesting research on the Broca's area. Bessel van der Kolk mentions it in his book. As a result of PTSD, quote, PTSD emerges from a part of the brain over which we have no control. Van der Kolk explains. In particular, one part of the left frontal lobe of the brain called the Broca's area shuts down when confronted by trauma. Without a functioning Broca's area, you cannot put your thoughts and feelings into words, Van de Kolk said. Our scans showed that Broca's area went offline whenever a flashback was triggered. And my guess is when I feel overly stressed, when indeed PTSD is kicking in, then my Broca's area goes offline. And then there are no words. So yesterday I realized something. About maybe now 1.5 years ago, I wasn't that verbal. I really wasn't. It was way more difficult for me to talk like this as I do now on a video. Impossible. And my belief is that actually it was the high meat consumption as a carnivore that led to such an improvement in speech. As a vegan, I was often brain fogged, depressed, more stressed, less resilient, exhausted, all of that, and my whole body was so inflamed, and I was in pain, and I think all of that, of course, had a great impact on my ability to speak. And now, since I am carnivore, I really feel it is a little bit easier to verbalize and to articulate. I feel more fluent now. I can, whatever video is playing in my head, I can bring that into words way better than I used to. But then on the other hand, I also used to be very, very shy. So shyness has a direct impact on your ability to speak. Well, that's just my observation on the side. When the brain gets what it needs, all the nutrients, cholesterol, fat, vitamin D, then of course it will function way better. That's just common sense, right? That's why I end this video with a meat picture. Meat heals. Meat was my life savior, really. I would be an invalid if I was still vegan, for sure. Now at least I function way better. I still struggle with all the sensory overload and stuff as an autistic, but my body gets what it needs, all the nutrients, so life quality for me has improved in a big way. I just want to mention that again.